Thanks to you at home for joining us here this hour. I'm very, very happy to have you here. Today is April 17th. This is the Old North Church in Boston, Massachusetts. When I say it is the Old North Church, I mean really old. The Old North Church is famous for something that happened in 1775. But in 1775, when that thing happened, the Old North Church was already old then. It was already more than 50 years old by that point. It was the venerable old landmark and, importantly, very tall building where the rebels had arranged in advance to use their code. They had arranged in advance that at the Old North Church they would hoist either one or two lanterns into the steeple of that church, and that would be the code. That would be the coded signal. If it was one lantern, that would mean the British troops were coming by land. If it was two lanterns, that would mean they were coming by sea, or at least by water. On the night of April 18th, 1775, they hung two lanterns in that steeple. That was the signal that the British troops were indeed on the move, and that they were not moving their troops into position for an attack by land. They were instead taking the more direct route toward Lexington and Concord by sea or by water. They were crossing the Charles River in boats. That's what the two lanterns meant. Once the rebels had figured out what the British were up to, once that two-lantern warning was hoisted, those in the know knew that it was time to move. Paul Revere and William Dawes, and later Samuel Prescott, they rode off into the night pell-mell on fast horses because it was their job to go sound the alarm, to go convey the warning, to stand up the defense. And when the dawn arrived, when the next morning arrived, when the British troops arrived in Lexington, Massachusetts that next morning, there was a welcoming party. There was the American militia, forewarned, forearmed, and ready to fight them. And what happened at Lexington and Concord were, of course, the first shots, right? And that was the start. And on that first day, the forewarned, forearmed, prepared militia's success against the British, that first day, it soon swelled the ranks of the militia to thousands and thousands and thousands of Americans who literally took up arms to throw off the tyrant king. And of course, they won. And that's how we got here. And tomorrow marks 250 years to the day since the two-lantern signal was hoisted into the steeple of the Old North Church in Boston, Massachusetts. At 6 p.m. Eastern tomorrow, Old North Church in Boston and churches and other houses of worship all over the country, and just regular people, regular Americans, are going to ring bells 6 p.m. Eastern tomorrow to mark this moment in our history. The day after tomorrow, on Saturday, that, of course, is the anniversary of what happened at dawn the morning after Paul Revere's ride, right? That is, this Saturday is the 250th anniversary of the battles of Lexington and Concord, where America took its first radical, literally revolutionary steps to free ourselves from tyranny and establish ourselves as a democracy. This Saturday, April 19th, on that 250th anniversary, we are expecting another day with potentially thousands of peaceful protests at state capitals all over the country. We're expecting protests this Saturday very much along the lines of what we saw 2 weeks ago on Saturday, April 5th. And you might remember the theme, the sort of banner under which those protests were organized 2 weeks ago, that was hands off. This weekend, this Saturday, perhaps inevitably, given the anniversary of the start of the American Revolutionary War, this Saturday, the banner for this weekend's peaceful protests will be No Kings. No Kings, national protest, April 19th. No Kings protests are expected, I believe, in all 50 states this weekend. Yet again, we are expecting thousands and thousands and thousands, likely hundreds of thousands of Americans to protest all together this weekend in every state in the country. Yet again, against our century's Old North Church moment, right? organizing our own efforts against the attempted authoritarian takeover of the United States government in our century. Americans figuring out what they can do. And of course, we are seeing protests every day, every day. I mean, these big days of protests like April 5th and this weekend, April 19th, but this was Augusta, Maine yesterday. Just on Wednesday. This was Augusta, Maine, farmers protesting against Trump's massive cuts to USDA funding and programs. And, you know, farmers are busy, very busy people, particularly this time of year. Anytime farmers are protesting, it's kind of a thing. You can see that tractor there. The sign on the front of it says, "Weed out the fascists. Support farmers, not billionaires." That was Augusta, Maine. This was San Diego, California yesterday. People protesting against cuts to the VA. Cuts to services for veterans, including lots of nurses out there protesting cuts to the VA from the Trump administration. This was South Dakota yesterday, outside an event where South Dakota Republican Senate leader John Thune was speaking. People had tape over their mouths at this protest, protesting John Thune's silence in the face of Donald Trump's destruction of the U.S. government and increasing defiance of the U.S. Constitution. Red state, South Dakota yesterday. This was today in Washington. This was very dramatic. These are coffins, full-size black coffins, being piled up outside the headquarters of the U.S. State Department. They brought 200 adult-sized coffins and 6 baby-sized coffins, each of which represents 100,000 people who may die because of what Secretary of State Marco Rubio and President Donald Trump did to the decades-old, wildly successful PEPFAR program, which was providing HIV medications to literally 20 million people around the world. And, you know, you can live a long, full life while HIV positive if you receive antiretroviral drugs to keep the virus suppressed in your body. But President Donald Trump ended those treatments mid-course for 20 million HIV-positive people by cutting off that program with no warning. And there's no substitution for PEPFAR. There's nothing like PEPFAR except PEPFAR. And Trump and Marco Rubio killed it, even while trying to say they weren't. And those antiretroviral medications have been cut off all over the world. And so these coffins today represent the death toll of this decision that they have made, of what they have done. Legendary U.S. AIDS activist Peter Staley conceived this protest today.
When I heard that just 2 weeks after Trump became president, that Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, decided to shut down USAID and PEPFAR, the best international foreign aid program ever launched by the U.S. since we rebuilt Europe after World War II. I knew that 20 million lives were now at risk. 20 million people with HIV around the world who were showing up to get their HIV meds refilled and finding the clinic doors shut, which happened immediately. I just couldn't sleep, and I thought, it's like, does President Trump realize what Musk is about to do to his legacy? That he's going to relaunch the AIDS crisis around the world with millions and millions of more infections and deaths? I'm still not sure he does, and we're already seeing those deaths, and they're now estimated that it'll be 5 million deaths before 2030. 5 million deaths in 5 years. That's a Holocaust. It's just mind-numbingly frightening.
That was today in Washington. Again, those hundreds of coffins brought and stacked up outside the U.S. State Department in protest of what the Trump administration has done to that program. That was today in Washington. This was from the federal courthouse today in Richmond, Virginia, the Fourth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. I will read to you from this ruling. Quote, "It is difficult in some cases to get to the very heart of the matter, but in this case it is not hard at all. The government is asserting a right to stash away residents of this country in foreign prisons without the semblance of due process that is the foundation of our constitutional order. Further, it claims in essence that because it has rid itself of custody, that there is nothing that can be done. This should be shocking not only to judges, but to the intuitive sense of liberty that Americans far removed from courthouses still hold dear. The government asserts that Kilmar Abrego Garcia is a terrorist and a member of MS-13. Perhaps, but perhaps not. Regardless, he is still entitled to due process. If the government is confident of its position, it should be assured that that position will prevail in proceedings to terminate the withholding of removal order. Moreover, the government has conceded that Abrego Garcia was wrongly or, quote, mistakenly deported. Why, then, should it not make what was wrong right? Quote, the Supreme Court's decision remains, as always, our guidepost. The decision rightly requires the lower federal courts to give due regard for the deference owed to the executive branch in the conduct of foreign affairs. The Supreme Court's decision does not, however, allow the government to do essentially nothing. It requires the government to, quote, facilitate Mr. Abrego Garcia's release from custody in El Salvador and to ensure that his case is handled as it would have been had he not been improperly sent there. Facilitate is an active verb. It requires that steps be taken, as the Supreme Court has made perfectly clear. Facilitation does not permit the admittedly erroneous deportation of an individual in disregard of a court order that the government not so subtly spurns. Facilitation does not sanction the abrogation of habeas corpus through the transfer of custody to foreign detention centers in the manner attempted here. Allowing this would, quote, facilitate foreign detention more than it would domestic return. It would reduce the rule of law to lawlessness and tarnish the very values for which Americans of diverse views and persuasions have always stood. The government is obviously frustrated and displeased with the rulings of the court. Let one thing be clear. Court rulings are not above criticism. Criticism keeps us on our toes and helps us do a better job. Court rulings can overstep, and they can further intrude upon the prerogatives of other branches. Courts thus speak with the knowledge of their imperfections, but also with a sense that they instill a fidelity to law that would be sorely missed in their absence. If today the executive branch claims the right to deport without due process and in disregard of court orders, what assurance will there be tomorrow that it will not deport American citizens and then disclaim responsibility to bring them home? And what assurance shall there be that the executive will not train its broad discretionary powers upon its political enemies? The threat, even if not the actuality, would always be present, and the executive's obligation to take care that the laws be faithfully executed would lose its meaning. Today, both the U.S. and El Salvadoran governments disclaim any authority and or responsibility to return Mr. Abrego Garcia. We are told that neither government has the power to act. The result will be to leave matters generally, and Mr. Abrego Garcia specifically, in an interminable limbo without recourse to law of any sort. The basic differences between the branches mandate a serious effort at mutual respect. The respect that courts must accord the executive must be reciprocated by the executive's respect for the courts. Too often today, this has not been the case, as calls for impeachment of judges for decisions the executive disfavors and exhortations to disregard court orders sadly illustrate. Now the branches come too close to grinding irrevocably against one another in a conflict that promises to diminish both. This is a losing proposition all around. The judiciary will lose much from the constant intimations of its illegitimacy, to which by dint of custom and detachment we can only sparingly reply. But the executive will lose much from a public perception of its lawlessness and all of its attendant contagions. The executive may succeed for a time in weakening the courts, but over time history will script the tragic gap between what was and all that might have been. And law, in time, will sign its epitaph. It is, as we have noted, all too possible to see in this case an incipient crisis. But it may present an opportunity as well. We yet cling to the hope that it is not naive to believe our good brethren in the executive branch perceive the rule of law as vital to the American ethos. This case presents their unique chance to vindicate that value and to summon the best that is within us while there is still time. While there is still time. That ruling today written by a high-profile conservative judge on the Fourth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals. In case it's not obvious, the point of that ruling is to deny the Trump administration what it was asking for, which was an emergency stay to let them avoid what the courts have thus far very plainly ordered them to do. This ruling on the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case, in which the Trump administration has been ordered to bring him back to the U.S., this that I just read you, this comes on the heels, of course, of yesterday's ruling that it's not just Kilmar Abrego Garcia. The Trump administration has been ordered to retake U.S. custody of all these guys, of the hundreds of men who the Trump administration sent to El Salvador for potentially life imprisonment without any court's adjudication as to their fate inside the United States. Remarkable rulings these last 2 days, particularly this ruling tonight from the Fourth Circuit. But I just want to say, in the spirit of Paul Revere tonight, I just want to note that the courts are not riding alone here. This stuff does not happen in a vacuum. You ask scholars of authoritarianism and dictatorship, and they will tell you that it's never just one thing that works in terms of resistance. It's everything together. And in our country, specifically on this issue at the sort of sharp end of the stick here on immigration, we really are seeing all kinds of resistance and strategic refusal and sounding the alarm all happening all at once. And it is mutually reinforcing. When you start seeing it come from all directions, it feeds on itself. It gains momentum. It gets bigger. And right now it is everywhere. It is in the courts. It is also in communities. It is in civic life. It is in political life. It is in the press. And it is in the streets. And I mean that all very specifically and literally. This is St. Paul, Minnesota, yesterday, outside the consulate of El Salvador in St. Paul. People in the streets lining both sides of the road demanding that the Trump administration follow the court's orders and bring back Kilmar Abrego Garcia and bring back these men who they have shipped to that foreign prison. This was Santa Rosa, California yesterday. Local clergy leading a rally in support of immigrants and against what Trump is doing. This was Denver, Colorado yesterday. Again, local clergy leading a protest, a rally in support of immigrants and against the Trump administration's treatment of immigrants. This was Grand Rapids, Michigan yesterday. Local people protesting against Trump administration plans to open an immigration prison, a so-called detention facility in their community. This was New Orleans yesterday, people protesting at ICE headquarters in New Orleans, Louisiana. These students yesterday protesting against how they're going against immigrants and international students at Kennesaw State, in Cobb County, Georgia, and in Newark, Delaware at the University of Delaware. When the Trump administration took a young man who's a legal permanent resident named Mohsen Madawi in Vermont this week, the community where he lives, where he is absolutely integrated into that community, they sprung into action. They were worried that Trump's agents were going to come for him. His friends and supporters had created a text group called Mohsen Just in Case to prepare a support plan, a network, a communication in case it happened. They were with him when the arrest happened. They made sure to film it, to make sure that it was posted on social media, that they alerted the press. They had prepared for the worst with lawyers who had prepped in advance legal motions to stop him being removed from Vermont and flown to one of these immigration dungeons, for lack of a better word, 1,000 miles away in Louisiana or somewhere. And because they had those prepped in time, those motions worked. A judge was able to order him kept in Vermont while he was still in Vermont before they had time to spirit him off elsewhere. Vermonters have since been protesting at the prison where he is being held in their state. Mr. Madawi is Palestinian. He was born and raised in the West Bank. They brought Palestinian flags to show their support for him. And they banged drums and yelled as loud as they could in the hopes that he could hear them inside the prison. Now in Vermont, the Democratic leadership in the state legislature says they want to terminate their state's contract with the federal government to keep immigration prisoners, immigration so-called detainees in the state's prisons, in their own facilities. That's Vermont. In Raleigh, North Carolina, the Trump administration has just sent notice to 24 Christians who fled Afghanistan when the Taliban took that country back over. They are legally here in this country. They were given legal permission to stay here for obvious reasons. For not obvious reasons, Donald Trump is now taking that away and telling these Afghan Christians that they have to return immediately to the tender mercies of the Taliban right now, this week. It is a Christian church in Raleigh, North Carolina that's advocating for them.
At the Apostles Church in Raleigh, there's a community of Afghans, many going through the same thing. Pastor Nick Kaminsky says the church has organized resources to help asylum seekers navigate the process.
It's a very personal issue. These are individuals, men, women, children that we know and have come to know and love.
That's Raleigh, North Carolina. In Utah, it's people who are legally here from Haiti and Venezuela, who are part of the community that they live in Utah, who are beloved there. Their neighbors in Utah are stepping up to help them and also to sound the alarm.
It's time for you to leave the United States. That's the first line of a letter from the Department of Homeland Security to several refugee families here in Utah legally. News specialist Dan Rascone is covering this story and joins us live. Dan, this has left neighbors shocked and upset.
It really has, Deanie. That's exactly right. Shocked, upset, angry, and also heartbroken that several of these families got this letter from the Department of Homeland Security telling them they got to be out of this country by the end of the week.
I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm embarrassed.
Emotions running high.
It's not right. It's inhumane.
For this group of neighbors in Mill Creek.
We love them and they love us.
Gathered together to fight for 3 refugee families.
I feel sad, really sad.
That arrived in the U.S. and in their area not long ago. All of them getting this letter from the Department of Homeland Security saying, quote, "It's time for you to leave the United States. Your parole will terminate in 7 days."
Unimaginable. The government that we love would do this to people we love.
Honestly feel like family to us.
2 of the families are from Venezuela, the other from Haiti, all too scared to identify themselves.
The letter said that I was supposed to leave.
This mother from Haiti has a 2-year-old daughter.
I was in shock because I wasn't expected something like that to happen because I came here legally.
Attorney Jim McConkey with the Refugee Justice League is helping the families get representation.
We're dealing with a group of people that are here legally, and the letters that were sent intentionally are designed to bully and mislead these people into believing that they don't have rights.
That's Utah. That's Mill Creek, Utah. Those neighbors standing up for their neighbors who have been taken. It's protests, it's community life, it's also civic life. These students at Harvard today rallying to support international students at Harvard, who the Trump administration is threatening as a group, threatening en masse. As their own university, one of the highest profile and most prestigious universities in the world, takes a firm stand against the administration and says they will not accede to Trump's demands. We're going to have more on that coming up in just a moment. But you know what? If you look just outside Harvard Yard, if you look at the hometown press in Boston, you will see not only standing ovation level support for Harvard choosing to wage that fight, you will also see in the biggest local paper, the Boston Globe, you'll see them today leading with a brand new investigative piece into these vigilante groups that have been claiming credit for feeding individual student names to the Trump administration for the administration to then target those people for arrest and deportation. The Globe's investigation today reviewed a so-called students deport list from one of these groups. Quote, it sometimes placed students at the wrong universities or featured people who were not even in the United States. One woman on the list was pictured wearing a hijab and identified as a Harvard student from Nigeria who had already been detained in Massachusetts. The group claimed she should be deported because her visa had been revoked in March for a pro-Hamas rally speech. Contacted by the Globe, the woman said she has never attended a pro-Hamas rally, she has never attended Harvard, and in fact, she has never visited the United States. An hour south in New Bedford, Massachusetts, the local NBC station Channel 10 has dug into this horrifying video in which ICE agents smashed through the window of a car to drag a man and a woman out of the vehicle. They report that the ICE agents repeatedly, while they were doing this, referred to the man in the car as Antonio. They insisted that that was what his name, and it was Antonio who they were looking for. Nobody in that car was named Antonio. It really does appear to be a case of mistaken identity. Local press has been covering it intensely, while ICE is defending its conduct by saying whether or not he's Antonio, the man was not in the country legally, and so, you know. The New Republic was first to report that one of the police officers responsible for the disputed gang designation for Kilmar Abrego Garcia appears to have himself been soon thereafter suspended from the police force for serious misconduct in an unrelated matter, which of course goes to a police officer's credibility on a matter like this. USA Today was first to report that in the case of the gay makeup artist who the Trump administration sent to El Salvador, potentially for life in prison, his supposed gang affiliation was due to a single officer with a history of serious credibility and disciplinary problems, including driving his car into a family's home while intoxicated, after which he was summarily fired. Now we've got increasing press coverage of the Trump administration sending get out of the country immediately letters to at least 3 U.S. citizens, 2 of whom are lawyers in Massachusetts and 1 of whom is a random doctor in Connecticut. All of them American citizens, all inexplicably told by the Trump administration that they must get out of the country within a week. And all of this press coverage, while it's depressing because of the subject matter, it is also incisive investigative press coverage. And it does have the effect of exposing the shambolic and slapdash and utterly incompetent behavior of the Trump administration as it embarks on this cruel and unconstitutional adventure for which it wants to be feared and respected. And instead they look ridiculous and cruel in equal measure. And that has the effect of shaping public opinion about what they're doing. And that fuels not just protests, and lots of them, but also lawsuits. Reuters reporting that on Tuesday alone this week, federal judges in at least 7 states issued orders blocking the Trump administration from acting against international students that it is trying to arrest. Lawsuits in Massachusetts, Montana, Wisconsin, Washington, D.C., New Hampshire, Michigan, everywhere, and more filed every single day. Those legal roadblocks tend to turn up information. The tide of incisive investigative press about what the administration is doing turns up yet more information about what Trump is doing and who he's hurting. And all of that information builds the public case, further galvanizes more public opinion against them and more protest against them. And you know what? If you keep eventually going like this stuff snowballs and it builds on itself. And eventually you are going to embolden elected officials to make them believe that it is time they better take action. And eventually you are going to end up with a U.S. senator in El Salvador himself trying to get his constituent out of there. And on that front, we have breaking news tonight. Just as we are getting on the air tonight, we have learned that Senator Chris Van Hollen, Democrat of Maryland, has been able to meet with imprisoned Kilmar Abrego Garcia. The government of El Salvador posting 3 photos online of the senator meeting with Mr. Abrego Garcia a short time later. Senator Van Hollen confirming that he did have a chance to meet with his constituent. He said, quote, "I said my main goal of this trip was to meet with Kilmar. Tonight I had that chance. I've called his wife, Jennifer, to pass along his message of love. I look forward to providing a full update upon my return." It is unclear where that meeting took place. It is unclear what Mr. Abrego Garcia's current status is. We are working on getting more information from Senator Van Hollen's office. We will bring it to you as we get it.
The baker and the handyman's sweet connection. In a quaint village nestled in a picturesque valley, there stood a small house in the shape of a mushroom. This whimsical home belonged to a young boy named Jamie, barely out of high school, who had a passion for baking. Inside, his cozy kitchen was always filled with the sweet aroma of cakes, cookies, and all sorts of delightful treats. What made his creation special was that each of his cakes was shaped like tiny mushrooms, a nod to his quirky home. Jamie's baking became the talk of the town. From birthdays to celebrations, everyone in the village adored his sweets.
Get your digital copy today at lulubooks.com and experience the adventure in EPUB or PDF format. Make sure you have a compatible reader to dive into this unforgettable journey. Don't miss out, unlock the secrets, and let the story begin.
Sable's Song, A Siren's Journey to Joy. Once upon a time, in a small, worn-out town in Middle America, there lived a little child named Sable. Born into poverty, Sable's body was frail, so thin that you could see her bones, but her heart was filled with an exuberance that not even hunger could dull. Sable was awkward, with dark, deep-set eyes that sparkled with innocence and wonder. Despite being born a boy, Sable always knew she was different. Inside her lived a girl, bright and effervescent, waiting to bloom.
Get your digital copy today at lulubooks.com and experience the adventure in EPUB or PDF format. Make sure you have a compatible reader to dive into this unforgettable journey. Don't miss out, unlock the secrets, and let the story begin.
The Park of Secrets.
In the year 2060, near the heart of Florida, just a stone's throw from Disney World, stood a theme park unlike any other, a place known as the House of Secrets. It was a magical park, much like a state fair, filled with towering rides, carnival games, and parades that drew people from all over the world. But among the grand Ferris wheel and the colorful day parade, there was one attraction that outshined them all, the Parade Princess, a mesmerizing mermaid named Kenya. Kenya was a sight to behold. At 22 years old, fresh out of college, she had the kind of beauty that drew people to her like moths to a flame. Her brown skin glowed under the park lights, her hair a stunning mix of purple and pink that cascaded over her shoulders. Little pink hearts adorned her cheeks, and a ribbon of color stretched across her nose. But it wasn't just her beauty that made her special. Her eyes, big and almond-shaped, seemed to capture the hearts of everyone who saw.
Discover the magic of the Park of Secrets. Step into a world of wonder with the Park of Secrets, a heartwarming tale by Ariel Williams that will captivate your imagination. This enchanting story is now available exclusively on Lulu Books.
The Future, Daughters of Liberty, A New Dawn. In 2040, the United States was a fractured nation, still reeling from the fallout of Project 2025, the catastrophic policy that had allowed a resurgence of systemic oppression. The Deep South had seceded once more, forming the antebellum republic, where human trafficking, racial inequality, and gender oppression became tragically normalized. The Second Civil War erupted as the rest of the nation sought to free those trapped in this dystopian regime. After years of bloodshed, Kamala Harris had finally led the Union to victory, restoring a fragile sense of hope. But the battle scars ran deep, especially in places like Louisiana, where the remnants of a broken society still lingered.
Get your digital copy today at lulubooks.com and experience the adventure in EPUB or PDF format. Make sure you have a compatible reader to dive into this unforgettable journey. Don't miss out, unlock the secrets, and let the story begin.
A Dying Planet, The Last Harvest.
In the year 2060, Earth is a shadow of its former self, choked by pollution, endless concrete, and abandoned by nature. Only a small fishing village by the sea has managed to preserve the planet's last untouched forest. In this dying world, June and Win, two young girls and the last children in their village, cling to the remnants of hope and innocence. Win roams the forest, collecting the season's last harvest, while June sings songs that echo with a haunting beauty through the village.
Get your digital copy today at lulubooks.com and experience the adventure in EPUB or PDF format. Make sure you have a compatible reader to dive into this unforgettable journey. Don't miss out, unlock the secrets, and let the story begin.
I told you. What did I tell you? Didn't I tell you? 'Cause I told you. And when did I tell you? A long time ago. And what did I say will happen when I told you? Exactly what just happened.